And it's. Do you prefer Mr. Ross, Ellis?
Yeah, Ellis Ross, Ellis. That's
Okay, okay, you got
nothing formal.
it.
Nothing formal.
When people call me Mr. Grant, I'm always like, did I do something wrong? All right, we have Ellis Ross with us, MLA in the Skeena region of Northern British Columbia. Thank you so much for being on with us today.
Not a problem. Glad to be here.
So you've done a lot of work in your community in Northern British Columbia, and I was reading on a little bit about it. Do you mind sharing with us, in your own words, some of the work that you've done?
Oh, geez. Where to start? I got elected to council in 2003 as a councillor. I spent 8 years of that doing the base work of being a full-time councillor, which meant I picked up a lot of the files that the council didn't want to deal with.
Mm.
And then 8 years later, I became chief councillor. And a couple of years after that, I was elected chief councillor by acclamation. But as chief councillor, that's where I did the bulk of some of the things I was doing with my council, including uh, tearing apart our structure, our leadership structure, getting us away from the Indian Act, and focusing more on economic development, specifically LNG. And what I really want to do is do a number of things that my people had talked about for generations. You know, educate our young people, uh, build an elder center, uh, fund a language and culture center, build an apartment on reserve, you know, replace our docks. And also I took them into uncharted waters. Like we acquired some of the most expensive property in Kitimat, the town site. And we built a condominium, a $21 million condominium that we leased out for 10 years. We bought a marina that was next door to us that I could never figure out how it left our hands in the first place. We acquired a large chunk of crown land that neighbored our existing village, and we set it aside for future use for residential. Across the channel, we acquired some of the most expensive waterfront property that we earmarked for economic development, and we signed IBAs with the companies that want to do work here, like Chevron and LNG Canada and Rio Tinto Alcan, and on and on and on. It was a great time. But that's just a short list of some of the stuff that me and my council did over the last 6 years or so.
So what?
There's more, but it was all about independence and
Right.
right getting our people ahead.
What inspired you to join council?
There was no inspiration.
Mm.
I was an angry young man, just like everybody else, mad at the government, mad at the white man, mad at my own council. But at the time when I got nominated, I was actually coaching a junior girls basketball team, 17 and under girls, and the program was gone for so long. I was trying to bring it back because I had two girls of my own. So when I got nominated, I thought, well, maybe I can tap into council's vast resources and all the money that they have, and I can divert it to my basketball teams because there was no money around, dude. But when I got into council, it took me about a month to realize that my council was flat broke. They had no money. And in fact, they owed so much money, Canada was threatening to come in and shut down the council and pay the bills on our behalf. We were a very poor band. And so, what inspired me in the beginning was actually all smoke and mirrors. And then at that point, I decided I'd better be quiet and listen and learn and read and understand the true nature of what we're up against here. Because up until then, I believed the narrative, right? What we're going through is everybody else's fault. And day by day, week by week, I found that wasn't true.
Can you tell me a little bit more about this narrative that you speak of?
Which one? The angry young man narrative?
Yeah.
That, well, it's an unspoken kind of history book where you learn just growing up about, how to basically hate the government, hate the system, hate the white man.
Mm.
Everything's, shaking your fist at somebody else. And it's, I never lived by that really, but, I was just out trying to make a living and, but every once in a while you'd come across it. And I had this experience that probably a number of people have experienced over the years. I'd go to a public meeting, for example, and I'd hear somebody get up in a public meeting and they'd speak brimstone and fire. Oh, the government, the white man took it, and it's high time that government listened to us. And everybody would cheer and yell and scream and, hey, we're on our way. And then nothing would change for the next 10 years. And that's when I got into council, I realized I was part of that audience that was encouraging that. Instead of listening to the leader that was trying to say, look, why don't we do something here? Why don't we change our pathway? Why don't we, get away from this complaining and yelling? And so I strive to be that leader that pushed for change instead of going along with the crowd and being angry all the time.
It sounds like you were hoping to work with your goals in mind within the system. Is that correct?
Yeah, because I heard a number of public meetings that I heard the words independence. I heard self-determination. I heard self-governance. And the one that struck me the most was the ability to address our own issues on our own terms. And the one topic I steered away from though was self-governance, because I didn't think that applied to independence. I didn't think that applied to success. I didn't think that was the magic formula. But it's and I blended it with reading up on the Indian Act and understanding the nature of the Indian Act, understanding the nature of Aboriginal rights and title case law, understanding the true definition of governance. And so all I did was read, and so by the time I became chief councillor, I had a solid plan in mind. Unfortunately, when I became chief councillor, my council actually didn't support my vision, and so it took me another 2 years for another council to come in and say, okay, let's give it a shot. Let's see what you're talking about. And that's when our band just basically took off. And we haven't looked back since. It's an amazing journey.
So this is back in 2003. Is that correct?
2003 when I became a councillor, but I became chief councillor when I was 2011.
So it sounds like in our society, we can be easily enamored by popularist politicians, people who are like these yes men and like, yeah, and they rile up the emotions, but you didn't fall for that.
No.
And because you didn't fall for that, people were like, what's your stick, right? Who is this guy? But you were able to sort of think logically and how can I help my community, my band appropriately within, you kind of have to work within the system, because the Canadian government and First Nations, these things are now inseparable from my understanding.
They are, but there's no, we were on a good path in BC in terms of trying to resolve rights and title issues. That's all gone now. It's changed in the last 3 years. But in terms of following the system, my point was there's a plan there someplace, and we got to help develop that plan. We shouldn't just be going along with the flow and just doing as we're told. And a lot of this, like for instance, I used to say this a lot because I viewed my council administration as Indian Act council administration. And I used to say, I said, you know what? I don't care about the Indian Act. I don't care about the funding that comes with it. I don't care. That's not our future. So why don't we segregate that over there, leave that over there, and let's put a couple of councils in charge of it. And let's come over here and let's deal with everything outside the Indian Act, because the Indian Act is so irrelevant.
Right.
I mean, it's so archaic. And I proved my point a couple of times. Once at a public meeting, people were still complaining about government, Canadian government, and the Indian Act. We got to do this. And so I got up and I said, hey guys, everybody put up your hand. Who here has read the Indian Act? And I put up my hand. And nobody put up their hand. I said, so what are you guys fighting about? What are you complaining about when you haven't even read it, when you don't even understand the nature of it? I said, I'm not here to talk about the Indian Act. I could care less.
Right.
I said, if we get away from this, if we get away from this kind of talk, I guarantee you the world will come to our doorstep. But you got to get away from this idea of, because every politician jumps on that we got to complain about the Indian Act, got to complain about the government. And that actually takes you away from, any type of progressive plan that's actually just sitting there waiting for you.
Because it's archaic, is what you're saying.
Oh, big time. I mean,
Yeah.
the stuff that's in there doesn't even apply. And even if we did try to apply it, there'd be a riot. I mean, the Indian Act breaks so many human rights issues and so many, I mean, it
Right.
doesn't make any sense to me. So why bother with it?
Well, I mean, even the name suggests just how bygone it is. But it was still named that until like 1981 or something like that. Is that correct?
Well, it's still there. And when I was watching this, when I was a counselor still learning, even natives don't want to change the Indian Act. I mean, you hear all this talk about, let's abolish the Indian Act. Let's get rid of it. But when you start to change it, the first ones to actually fight the change are actually Aboriginals. And I've related this as akin to being in a really bad relationship. You're being abused by your spouse. And somebody says, well, why don't you leave your spouse? And then you can't come to leave your spouse. And so instead of trying to change it and all that kind of stuff and trying to get away from it, I just said, guys, just ignore it. I mean, the only thing that we're really reliant on in terms of the Indian Act is the money that comes to our band to provide programs for our people, which that in itself, I don't get either. I don't believe in that. And I think the structure of that would be better changed to suit, how we're evolving as First Nations. But you come to our band, we made a lot of money on projects. We made a lot of money on land acquisitions, and now we're starting to build stuff. We're starting to build our own programs. My band council last year just bought an apartment complex for $11 million last year, and they sectioned off a part of it for our own people for low income, and they opened up the other section. It was part of a plan that I had probably about 4 years ago to get away from the idea that we shouldn't buy our own land, we shouldn't buy our infrastructure. Right. But my plan was turned down. And then last year, the council brought back that plan and bought an apartment complex. And plus, we're building an apartment complex on reserve. I mean, in today's day and age, you need money.
Yes.
If you want to resolve some of these issues.
And that's another problem, is that where is the money going and where is it centered, right? I mean, we all pay taxes, but where does that money from taxes go? Predominantly, it goes in BC, it goes to the lower mainland.
Yeah.
That gets the most attention, that gets the most press, that makes the most quote unquote money, whereas the North is viewed as a resource to be extracted from, right?
Yeah, that's true. And in fact, it's Kitimat, we could have been a huge generator of revenues for the province, but the province actually cut a nice sweetheart deal for the LNG industry up here in Kitimat. But they're still providing a tremendous amount of revenue and opportunity up here in Kitimat. And just how do we capitalize on that? If I knew then what I know now, I would have put more effort into making sure that the region itself, could flourish and could actually build off this success that we're seeing. But I was chief councillor of a small little band. I wasn't actually representing a region. So now that I look back on some of the stuff here, looking back, I'll give you an example. Rights and title is actually protected by the Constitution of Canada, Section 35.
Okay.
And that the flow down case law of that actually gives Aboriginals' legal standing when it comes to these types of projects. So that's why we could negotiate revenues, jobs, training, contracts. Then I come out of it, and I'm in the MLA, and I see there's no legal authority to represent non-Aboriginal interests in a region. And so now I start to question. I say, okay, we got this major project, $40 billion. Who is responsible for making sure that non-Aboriginal interests are protected so that our communities can flourish? Local contractors, local employees, local businesses, and there is no legal mechanism for it. And so it's, and what I think is that as a politician, at the very least, I can highlight this and I can represent those non-Aboriginal interests, because at the end of the day, I got to live here.
Right.
I like the services here. I like the shopping here. I like the hospitals. So why wouldn't I advocate for better services in the region when it comes to major projects? So it's something that I noticed right away when I came to this position.
It sounds like, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it takes me a while to figure things out, but you're advocating for cooperation between all members of your community, of society, be it the settler population, right, and the Indigenous people that live there, rather than just forwarding the Indigenous community. Is that correct?
Without a doubt. In fact,
yeah.
We put out a booklet probably about 10 years ago, because I was watching everybody argue over the definition of reconciliation. And where I first read that word reconciliation was reading Aboriginal Untitled case law. And then I started to see everybody use that word for their own purposes. They're running for re-election. Oh, we need reconciliation, and using it as an excuse for everything under the sun. Oh, that's not reconciliation. And I try to kind of ground people and saying, wait a minute. If you look at number one, the truest definition of reconciliation, that means to come back together.
Right.
Right?
Right.
That means at one point we used to be together.
Yeah.
So
reconcile our differences. The expression. Right.
But in case law, what it says is the judge said, we'd better reconcile our differences, because let's face it, none of us are going anywhere. And I thought about that. When I was reading case law, almost 15 years ago, I thought a lot about that, and I didn't quite understand it, because I thought rights and title, focused, get what I want, and finally turn the tables on government and turn the tables on corporations. But then as I started to move through my work there, I started to realize actually that judge was actually correct, because a lot of Aboriginals use the services provided by the colonialists or the settlers, words I don't use. And in turn, the non-Aboriginals, the ones that are actually in charge anyway, are trying their best, but they don't understand, the nature. And so I think instead of fighting all the time, why don't we try to bridge this gap that we have with understanding? And then we can solve some of the issues that we're actually talking about for the last 50 years.
Yes.
Right?
Well, and that's such a great point. I mean, again, it's what am I doing on my side, on the other side, the non-First Nations perspective? How can we build that bridge of trust? Because trust has been lost. There's no obviously it has. So how can we rebuild that trust between you and I?
Yeah, I think it's understanding. I think it's getting together, because the fear that we have of each other is all based on misinformation and ignorance.
Yes.
That's all it is.
Yes.
So give you an example. When I was Chief Councillor, we had this ongoing battle with Hydro, BC Hydro. And it was connection with Rio Tinto Alcan's broken promises of 67 years ago in terms of electricity. But we always had this kind of love-hate relationship until we had a blackout that lasted over a week. And we were snowed in, we couldn't get in, couldn't get out. And I had a hell of a time getting back from Vancouver. I took a plane that barely landed in Terrace. I took a rental car from Terrace because my truck was snowed in for the next couple of days. I took one that just came in, wasn't clean, jumped in it, came to Kitimat. And then I couldn't get to the village because my 7 mile road was snowed in. And that was the last priority. So I jumped on a skidoo from a guy, search and rescue. They took me halfway. Couldn't go any further because of the trees down. And I said, I'm going to walk the rest of the way. But we chopped some trees and made it in. And when I got into the village, it was, we weren't in emergency mode. Like, it wasn't state of emergency, but there was a lot of anxiety, and so when we got through it, we started to talk with BC Hydro in terms of how do we prepare for the next one? How do we make sure it doesn't happen again? And then when we were done, you know what, some of the answers I got, I brought to the community. And I told the community, I said, you know what, BC Hydro is not that bad, actually. They're doing their best. So why don't we bring BC Hydro in? They explain their side. We explain our side. We share a meal. And let's start this new relationship. The community agreed. We sat down. We broke bread. And by the end of it, our people were saying, hey, good on you, BC Hydro. We didn't know that part. So, we gave them some gifts. And since then, we haven't had any real problems with BC Hydro. So there's ways to actually bridge this divide that we have. And it's, number one, you got to have an understanding. You got to cure the ignorance on both sides, because it's on both sides.
And relationship, right? We need to develop a functional relationship that's built on respect, like you say,
and understanding.
Yes. Yeah.
Understanding the issues that we're both facing. I mean, without the understanding, I mean, there's no common ground.
Right. The other piece, and this is a very sweeping narrative, one that I'm not so aware of. I'm not as well versed on as I should be, but the reservation systems in Canada. I talk to people and they say things like, well, why do First Nations people live on reservations? And my understanding is that, well, traditionally speaking, First Nations people didn't live in reservations. That was a design by the government.
That's right.
So that they could acquire land appropriately. Are you able to share a little bit on the facts of that?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's our when I was elected in 2003, my council asked me to be the full-time councillor and I was the first one. Because the chief
first full-time.
The first full-time councillor. They paid me $45,000 a year. So I quit my job.
Yeah.
To go work for the council.
Yeah.
And the council never really told me what to do. They just said, oh, just, sit in the office and put out fires and we'll give you files from. So there was times where I just sat there. So I started going down to the archives and started reading everything I could. Every day I'd go down and read the archives. And, there was a bit of a history that we had established in terms of how the reservations came to be in our territory. And for the most part, our people back then who didn't understand the legal system, didn't understand governments, didn't quite understand the language, they didn't know what happened. All they knew was the guy came in and said, hey, could you show us, your hunting sites and your old village sites? And so, us being trusting said, yeah, okay. So they took them down through our territory and showed them, the different areas where we hunted and fished. And then, so the government then took the 19 locations and they took little postage stamps of land, bang. They said, there's your land. It's yours forever under the Indian Act. And our people were going, what happened?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? And so after that, when they try to figure out what happened, then they try to figure out, how do we fight this? How do we reverse this? How come, before that big river system over there, I used to be able to go camp, fish, hunt, and now I'm relegated to this little chunk of land that's not even close to the river. And basically they lost that fight. And even at that, the government, without our knowledge, leased out our lands to companies for pennies on a dollar that we didn't know about. And that the money actually flowed into our Ottawa Trust Fund. And so a lot of this stuff happened with, it was probably legal at the time under the government's laws, but our people had no clue, not a clue. Today, the reservation system actually means relatively nothing to us. Nothing. We've basically moved on and just said, it is what it is, but we're not going to spend any more money fighting it. Let's take on this new system. So the reserve system was, it was a mystery to our people, and it cost us a lot of money in trying to fight it, a lot of effort. But to tell you what, the bands down south got huge tracts of land, huge.
In America or like southern?
No,
BC?
southern BC. And whereas us, we got little chunks of land, like I guess 19 little reserves spotted all over our territory. Bands down lower BC got huge chunks of land next to nice lakes, and a lot of them took advantage of it in terms of the tourism industry. But for us, our land, like give you an example where I live in Kitimat Village, the Indian agent explained it because we got displaced from our village across the channel where an aluminum smelter sits now. So they were trying to figure out where do we put these Indians. And this chunk of land we're on now was actually decided upon. And the Indian agent described it as, yeah, let them have it. It's not even good for agriculture. It's just good. It's just sand and rocks. So go ahead, let them live there. And that's the attitude government had of us back then.
Jeez. Well, and then the other disturbing legacy, of course, is the residential schools and this idea that, again, it was maybe founded on good, good pretense, the quote unquote, the white man's burden, right? That they would save the man, but kill the savage. That was the exact quote that they used, only to destroy the man too, for the most part.
Yeah, I think government jumped on this idea based on, what leaders thought at the time might have been a good thing. When the church came to our band, they opened up a school for girls, teach them how to read and write. And I was reading, I was doing my reading in the archives, I came across a newsletter called the inaugural. And it was, they published this letter that the administrator for the school wrote, and they talked about the complaints from parents in the village that said it's not fair that just our girls get educated. So when we come in from our camps, our boys, they don't get the education of math and reading and writing. They don't get that. It's not fair. We should be able to get our kids educated too. I think government jumped on that idea, and they actually developed the residential schools you talk about. I think our people understood that there was a world coming where reading and writing was going to be important.
Right.
Understanding money was going to be important. But I think government took that to the next level, and for whatever reason, created this residential school system without any firm rules behind it. And that's what you saw coming out of those residential schools, all the abuses and all that. But I think the original intent, I think, had some good ideas behind it. But man, this is what I don't like about politics. You combine politics with government, right? It's a bad mixture. I know it's a different day today, but it's back then. We weren't even considered people.
Yeah,
we were considered beasts. I mean, I'll give you this. There's one point on reading the archives. After a year or two of reading the archives, I realized what had happened to our people. And I was sitting in the archives room, which is separate from our council office. And I was sitting in the archives room, and it finally dawned on me what had happened to Aboriginal people, and specifically my people, reading about residential schools, the churches, reading about the Indian Act and all that kind of stuff. And I sat there and I just cried.
Hmm.
And I hadn't cried since my girls were born. You know, I made a promise to myself when I was turned a young man, I was never going to cry again, because I cried so much as a young kid. But I cried that day, and then I got angry. Now, okay, payback's a bitch. You know, I'm going to come back, and I'm going to find a way to, I'm going to get them.
Yeah.
Then a couple of days later, when I settled down, I realized, you know what? If I think about revenge, if I think about payback, I'm not doing anybody any kind of good service, and it's not going to help my people get out of poverty, keep them out of prison, keep our kids out of government care. So I can't be angry. I got to think this out. How do I help my people? And so I got away from the ideas of revenge, but that anger was real. I was seething. But thankfully, I thought about it, and that's what gave me a better perspective on the Indian Act and residential schools, and acknowledge it, but fix today and fix tomorrow. But don't dwell on that, because it's just going to eat you and tear you apart.
And I struggle with that myself, is that you read these histories and you're right, it's infuriating. And that's me saying it, and I'm not necessarily a person, you know, white privilege, right? I'm not a person who was directly affected by that. But when you start to see how this was designed, you know, you do want that kind of idea of revenge, but you get back in a different way, right? You do things positive for your community, for others. And, you know, you work to heal. I mean, that's part of the reason why I got into clinical counseling, is I didn't want to further exacerbate the pain. I wanted to help heal people and ultimately help heal myself, which is what you've done.
Oh yeah. And you know, the thing about it too is that it's an underlying message that I'm going to get revenge on the people that live today. Well, the people that live today, they weren't there 100 years ago. They have no idea what the history was, or no idea what you're going through right now. So it's taking your anger out on somebody that's totally oblivious to what you're going through is not a good way. Even government leaders that don't understand, you know, there's no sense in taking your anger out on them.
Yeah.
The best you can do is basically chart a path for today and tomorrow. That's the best you can do. But that's why we wrote this booklet on reconciliation, on showing people what had happened in general to the Aboriginals. But you know what? Over the years, though, you know, ever since I started reading up on that, the atrocities that were applied to natives, you compare that to how other people have been treated around the world, and you'll know that this is part of human nature in terms of how people were treated.
Yeah.
The Irish, you know, the black people, the Africans, you know, the Australians, the Jewish people.
Yeah.
I mean, this is human nature. And so when I was looking at all this stuff going on around the world, the one thing I looked at is, okay, if all those horrible things happened to those people, how did they survive, and how did they learn to thrive in today's society? Because I didn't see my people thriving. I seen us surviving, but there had to be a way. If everybody else had been afflicted with these horrible actions, then, you know, we should take a lesson there. How do we come out of this? I mean, it's not unique what Aboriginals of Canada went through. It's not unique to to what's happening around the world. I mean, you look at the genocides, the real genocides that happened like over in Africa. Even the Bosnian Serbian conflict was characterized as, you know, genocide. So I took a bigger approach to it and saying, okay, as a society, how do we build ourselves up again? How do we make ourselves, you know, part of a larger society? Because complaining is not helping.
And how do we move from, like you say, surviving to thriving?
Yes.
And it sounds like your answer to that was to try to put policies in place that can benefit your community, but not just First Nations community, but your community overall.
Yeah,
Like all people.
oh, without a doubt. In fact, the thinking went along my head, I realized, I said, you know what, there's got to be a way to succeed without disrupting the larger society. And there's got to be a way. There can't be winners and losers here.
Mm,
And when I thought about the larger society, I thought also, my community is actually part of the larger society as well, because we have our own society here in our village, our culture, our language that we're trying to save. But if I destroy the larger society, and I affect that negatively, my people go over there and they use the hospitals,
yeah.
they love the shopping, they use social services, so in a way it's kind of two societies blended. So I don't want to do anything that'll actually damage, you know, somebody else's society.
There's a human ecosystem in play here,
Yes,
right? We're all working together,
yes.
you know.
And yet you can still branch off to your own little.
Yes, and that's important.
Yeah.
You need to the thing that I've talked to people about is larger society, and I like that term, larger society. What is its identity? I sometimes wonder, does it even know?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I read an article years ago. It said Canada had no culture,
Hmm.
and it was an interesting concept, because mainly we're a melting pot.
We're a
You know?
fusion.
Yeah, everybody comes in with their own
Yeah.
culture, and you kind of share that little bits and pieces with each other. But overall, did Canada have a culture? I don't know. I mean, we're still a young country, very young, and we're still developing. So it's a identity of Canadian society. I don't know. In fact, one of the latest thing I'm learning is that I still have unbreakable loyalty and pride in my community, my people. But when I come out of this, and I'm now the MLA, and I'm thinking more about the success of BC and Canada, I don't see that same pride coming from Canadians.
Right.
I don't see it.
Right.
Right, and that's why we're so easily picked off by different factions. Whereas you go to America, man, those guys,
A little
they're,
bit too much.
yeah, patriotic, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can talk about the division of the United States, but when the chips are down, United States are hugely patriotic. They love the flag, they love the Constitution.
They are American.
They are American,
Right.
and they'll fight for it if they have to.
Yeah.
Canadians, I don't think are like that. I don't think we're that 100% patriotic, unless you talk about, say, a hockey game.
Right.
Importance.
And even then it's like, oh, come on, that's what I'm known for.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So why do you think that is, that we just don't understand our own identity, this larger society?
I'm not sure. I've tried to read different articles on it, on what it means to be Canadian, and it's just I don't know. I just go back to the idea that, we're still young, we're still evolving, we haven't really, matured enough. We haven't been through the battles like United States or these other countries. Uh, the things that Canadians did seem to have been lost on Canadians. I mean, Canadians are well known for their contributions to World War II,
Right.
right, as a country. But in terms of development and identity, I don't think it's there, and I don't see the one thing that keeps us together, Canadians. I don't. I mean, I've tried to say, to build a strong country, you need a strong economy,
Mm.
and that certainly helps build strong societies. But I don't see Canadians actually thinking that way. I have never been able to figure out what makes Canadians proud to be Canadian. Whereas I know without a doubt, I know what it means to me as a Haisla person,
Right.
as a Kitimat person. I know without a doubt. But Canadians in general, I don't know. It's hard to pinpoint.
And it's just this weird conglomerate, right? I mean, what, 90% of our population lives within 50 kilometers of the US border, some crazy number like that.
Yeah.
So much of the media that we consume is American. To really understand yourself, because as I said, I am part of this larger society, I best understood myself when I am a minority in different countries. For example, I've been to Barbados, and a friend of mine, he is Bajan. So I wasn't just living the tourist life. I was very much in the world of Barbados. I've been to Haida Gwaii, where again, I was a minority. And it's there that you kind of start to understand a little bit of who you are. But again, it's still quite a vague sense. But it really does come back to this idea of, I think we are just a fusion, or we're becoming a fusion of so many things that brought us here. Because if you really break it down, my family is Scottish and English, but I don't really know what that means.
You got an inner turmoil, Scottish versus English. Right?
Yeah. Oh, there's inner turmoil there. Trust me. Right. We need only watch Braveheart to understand that. Right. But it kind of comes down to who are we? And then being careful when you say that, right? Because again, you're part of that larger society. You're the quote unquote people in power. So to not know who you are, right? Kind of a strange statement. You ought to know who you are, shouldn't you? So.
And you only got to look at social media feeds in terms of what you think about. We're consumed by Donald Trump and American news.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
We run an election here in BC. Nobody
watched it.
Right?
It wasn't dramatic enough.
Yeah, but we watch every day when Trump gets up to tweet something, or
yeah,
that consumes us. That's our lives. Whereas this is what I don't understand about Canadians.
Yeah.
You get your own elections in BC, municipalities, your country, but you are more interested in Trump and the American politics than anything. And I don't get that. I don't understand that.
Here's what I think, and please correct me, but because I'm 31, what do I know yet? Not much, let me tell you. But it's almost like it's not exciting. And when things aren't exciting, when there's no drama, you can get away with things. Because let's be honest, what's going on in northern BC in terms of the resources and the water, the boil advisory, that should be pressing news. But nope, Donald Trump and his raid on the Congress or whatever, that takes up so much more bandwidth. Why? Because I think it's more exciting, or so we think.
Entertainment, I guess, right?
Yeah. I mean, what did the Romans love? Bread and circuses. Meanwhile, the Roman Empire was crumbling. Yeah. Right? But they all went to the Colosseum to see some guy beat the hell out of some other guy. Distraction, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm afraid is happening.
It could be.
Yeah.
But I think really truly that's why there should be a line between governments and politics.
Yes, I agree.
Politics is more entertainment, show, but governance is actually the basis of how our society should be formed and maintained.
Think about it this way: there was a separation during the Enlightenment between church and state. That's when they're like, hold on, maybe the church shouldn't run the country. People are like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. To your point, maybe these politicians that are getting, paid off, like there's some extreme lobbyism that's going on. Yep. That is inauthentic to what democracy is, right? Democracy isn't brought to us by FedEx, you know what I mean? By our sponsors. It's brought to us by our people. That's what democracy is.
Yeah. And the thing about, I didn't know much about legislature or BC politics before I became an MLA, but I did lobby government, BC government, and to a certain extent, the Canadian government when I was Chief Councillor. Only because, there were some things that I wanted to see happen in terms of LNG happening in BC. We lobbied heavily. But now that I'm an MLA, you want to reach out to me? Reach out to me.
Right.
Want to come visit me in the legislature?
You're not elitist.
Yeah, come
Yeah.
visit me. But you don't need, and I don't care what your political stripe is. You don't need to pay somebody to get into my office. You don't need to like email me. Like some of the stuff that you probably going to contact me about is probably not my area. It's not my expertise. But I'm just a regular guy. I'm trying to do a job on behalf of BC. But there's ways to contact me,
Right.
and I'm not off limits. Whether I'm in Terrace, Kitimat, or if I'm in Victoria, I'm not off limits. There's ways to contact me.
Well, I mean, clearly, right?
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
You've made yourself available, and people need to see leaders that are of the people.
My granddaughter, we share this space. She goes to school here once in a while.
Yeah.
And I get booted from
musical chairs, the Zoom musical chairs.
So I resort now to the basement. Right? And
you got demoted.
Yeah, and so I put myself up in a little place here. Now the other people in my house want to use this space as well. So I just keep getting pushed to different parts of the house.
I know the feeling. My daughter, she's 17 months old. I have to do this out of a separate house because she'll just open the door. Ah! It's like, oh, I guess the meeting's over. But you had mentioned the importance of an economy for a strong country, and that represents the way the world is. Like that's just what we need is this kind of capitalist system. I avoid using that word, but also education, and that's the empowerment of the self. And we do need more of that these days. Like you said, the work that you're doing, you're not an elitist, you're an approachable person, and you listen. And that's what democracy is.
And it's I do link the economy to a strong country, but also this is what I learned as a Chief Councillor, reading rights and title case law and knowing our history. You do need a strong economy for a strong society.
Right.
Because I've seen the reverse.
Right.
On reserves all across Canada, there's no economy. And you have high levels of unemployment, crime, imprisonment, kids in care. So if you don't understand the true value of a strong economy, talk to any First Nations leader who's trying to build an economy. And I've seen both now. My village doesn't have an economy still, but we participate in the economy around us. And now my band actually uses the proceeds of engagement, and we actually make sure that all our band members on the band list, no matter where they live, they get help. So if they're in Vancouver, Alberta, whereas a typical Indian Act band only gets enough funding to deal with their members on reserve, which is 50% of their band list.
Right.
But because we got our own revenues now, and and in turn, when we help that person in Vancouver, that person is actually making their society stronger in Vancouver, in their own little clique. So this is all about strong society and the bonds that tie us, and actually the obstacles that keep us apart.
Right.
So that's what I think about the economy and links with a strong society.
And I think that that's the way the world is going, is we need to understand that there is an ecosystem beyond our understanding that we are all interconnected, right?
Hugely. And it's getting, the world's getting, this social media stuff is crazy. I never thought that the age of information that was first talked about in the 80s, would get to this point.
Yeah.
This is incredible.
I was talking to a guy from Nigeria about like a grassroots uprising against the government. Like, isn't that mind blowing? When would that ever get the time of day before? Like, I would just be watching, The Simpsons or whatever, and like humming away. Now I'm having these meaningful conversations that are opening my eyes, right? And I can share it with others.
Well, it's touching every part of our lives now.
Yes.
We don't even know. A couple of years ago, my son-in-law, I went to visit my daughter, and we were sitting there talking. Well, I thought we were talking. He was playing a video game, and I'd say something back, and Then I realized, who are you talking to?
Right.
He said, oh, I'm playing this, I'm talking to some guy in Germany. They're playing a video game.
Yeah.
And Germany. Oh yeah, my other teammate is from Australia. And we're all talking to each other. And it's just, I don't think we understand how the internet and the age of information is actually affecting every part of our lives. It's a new age.
And the interesting thing is that those are real connections
Yeah.
with
Real.
Germany and Australia. It's not about like,
Yeah.
oh, hey, the oil crisis over there. Like, how are you doing? It's like, let's play this game, this shared, distraction, be it Fortnite, be it whatever, and let's have a good time. And it's through that you start to see that people are people,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
No matter what your walk of life is, at the end of the day, we all want to be able to, live with ourselves and enjoy life and do this stuff. I mean, this is what drives me nuts is that politicians look for ways to divide us so they can get elected.
Yeah, so they can reap what they sow,
Yeah.
right? Because that's their harvest.
And it's all about, oh, that person over there is bad or that party over there is bad.
Yeah.
And where I'm trying to come from is no, we're all the same. We all want to put food on the table and clothes on our kids' back, and there's stuff we want to do in today's life. It's just, let's stop dividing people.
Man, you got my vote. Let me tell you, you have my vote. Wow. So kind of my last question, because I am looking at time and I don't want to take up more time than you've given me. Thank you. Is I've read a lot as a clinical counselor about trauma. And I do believe that there's historical trauma, such a thing as historical trauma. We talked about residential schools. We've talked about the reservation systems, borders in the world. How do we break the cycle? We see problems with addiction. We see problems all around the world, right? These mental calamities. How do we break the cycle and empower people?
So I'm an alcoholic, 20 years. I dabbled in drugs as a young man. And all those ads on TV and everything else didn't break my love of drugs. Uh, I think this is going to be, in terms of trauma, it's going to be person by person, and you need a trigger to actually break that trauma. And for me, it was an idea that, look, this was passed on to me. It was learned behavior. And so what am I going to do to break that cycle? I'm going to have to make some sacrifices. I'm going to have to be disciplined to kind of say that I don't want my kids and my grandkids to grow up the way I did. And it does. In the beginning, it's hard because I love to drink. And when I drank, I loved to fight. I loved to argue and do all the freaking crazy stuff. But in terms of sacrificing that, if you can call it sacrificing, what I called fun.
Right.
It was, and now looking back, and it wasn't fun. It was a horrible way to live. Horrible. And for me, it was like, okay, I've got to show my kids. I've already showed them the dark side of what it means to be an Aboriginal growing up, I guess. But how do I show them a different side of me? The kind of person that I really want to be. I want to be a father. I want to be somebody you can depend on. I want to create a really safe home life. And I don't want to bring any of those outside influences that can actually expose my girls to rape.
Yeah.
These are really tough questions. I mean, the trauma is, I think you got to face it face on, and you, person by person, you got to look in the mirror. What am I doing to actually break that cycle? And this is what I did. It was painful, but 20 years later, I'm glad I made that decision. One morning I just said, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to be part of this idea of prolonging the trauma or the effects of trauma. My girls now, they have no issue with substance abuse. They have no issue with fighting. And who knows, my grandkids are probably could care less about rights and title, could care less about, the Indian Act, and, and they're not going to know what it means to be a substance abuser. So I think it's going to be painstakingly, one person at a time. You need a trigger. And as an individual, what are you going to do to break that cycle? Because that's how we do it. we're not going to be able to do it en masse
Right.
as a society.
Wow. Ellis Ross, thank you so much for your time, man.
Thank you very much, and stay warm.
Yeah, -7 here. To us, we're dying of frostbite. What is it up there? Minus 15?
It was -20 there yesterday, but I think it got down to -10 today.
There you go. Do you guys have a hot tub?
No.
All right, man. Hey, thank you so much. Take care.
Nice talking to you.